I think both of our speakers, being in the field of education, would appreciate that today, being Good Friday, uh, for Christians, is a very important day that marks the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And it points to a kind of a historical moment for all of us to think about what is the Easter after the coronavirus, what is the new uh, forms of social transmission education that we're going to see in this post coronavirus period. So let's begin. If the speakers agree with Aravik, to really start us on how do you see this coronavirus impacting education and our interactions and basically our culture today? Do you have any thoughts as an opening question?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jill, for having me for this webinar. I believe it's a great honor for me to join this movement, Jai Jagat movement, in this online version. And I like how you framed it, that you have transformed this into a virtual educational experience. And I very much love the word that it's an experience rather than a challenge, because this is all the time people are talking about challenges and very little about the opportunities and experiences that we're having today. So obviously in the world of education, there are a number of things that we need to be concerned about still. And as an opening things, I have a few points that I'd like to share with you. Well, first of all, we're talking about the effects of pandemic rather than the causes, because if we were to talk about the causes, then all the oppositions all around the world that have ever mentioned anything has to do with the causes that we have as an effect on healthcare, on financial institutions, on economic difficulties, on supply chain, science and education, psychology, and society. So I want to identify 3 very specific actions that are impacting a spectrum of our behavior in these days. So first of all, it's that we know as a result of pandemic, the childcare facilities have been closed. So the first thing, this is having a huge impact on 4 groups of stakeholders. First of all, it's the employers, I think. So the employers need to adjust to a new reality, which is the home-based working. And for most of the employers that have this opportunity, and also because of the closure of the childcare facilities, the employers also need to have even more flexibility in terms of providing their employees opportunities to work maybe off the normal schedules, and also considering to jungle within the unpaid care and household work that the employees are supposed to do. So this is the first thing that I think it's something that is to be considered with closure of childcare facilities. The second thing is that this action that is as a result of pandemic is very much impacting the household's dynamics. We see that within the household, the members are forced to change their behaviors from adjusting the culturally assigned roles to their daily actions and taking care of the minors that they might have at homes or the elderly people. So this is also something that is supposed to be considered. And most importantly, this is impacting child development and care. Because we are not really sure that within a household, a family is in a position to provide all the necessary care and education to support the long-term human capital development. And there are a number of resources, but we're also not sure whether a family household member is in a capacity to consider all of these resources and provide the necessary support to the minor that has ended up being at home because of closure of the childcare facilities. And of course, this comes even more problematic with the employees. If an employees are healthcare workers, if they're working on the front line, and this is something that the employers should consider with the employees. The second action is homeschooling. I am really being very cautious not naming it distance education or online education, because it's not always the case, but we are predominantly moving towards homeschooling. And I see three areas of challenges here that I'd like to quickly underline. First of all, it's coming with the teachers. So teachers, they need to adapt to the new realities. And what we face today is with those who have the opportunity to do the online education, they lack the methodology of online education. And we see that the curricula is not really that much being adapted to the new realities. The teaching and learning methodologies are not being adapted to the new realities. And it's a very complicated job. We understand that we need to have time to adapt to this. But I think that the education society can provide a platform for co-learning within the teachers to know how they can adjust to this new realities of homeschooling. Because one of the methods of homeschooling is currently this distant or online education, which is, by the way, not a new phenomenon. It's been in place since the late 19th century, but the means of the feedback are being changed along the development of the technology. So this is the first thing. The second thing is we know that because of homeschooling, there is very little exercising, and it is very much impacting the physical development of children. And I did see a few schools and a few governments that were very cautious to promote physical activity of children, but this is not something that is being considered as one of the most important ones. So I'd like to underline this one as well. Second thing is that this has indeed added excess amount of workload for the teachers, for the school administrators, for the parents, and in many cases also for the children. And the adjustment of curricula is absolutely necessary to consider all of these changes. And finally, a good thing with this is that there is an abundance of online resources. And finally, this has given an opportunity to peer review those online resources. And once we are in the post-pandemic era, we will be able to identify what are the good online resources that we've used, and also reconsider a lot of methodologies that has been used. Not to say that for kids it's an excellent experience for those who are doing, of course, online education, but it's an excellent experience to become technology literate in many aspects, and also for the teachers. The second one here is the connectivity and access issue, which I think maybe we can come back later on. But if we're talking about online or distance education as one of the homeschooling methods of homeschooling, then this is an issue in Armenia and a number of countries around the world. We've been quickly exchanging thoughts with my colleagues all over the world that this is something that will end up in probably more even increased learning poverty that most of the developing countries are having. And maybe new data, we need to come up with new indicators for data collection to make sure that we have tackled the learning poverty and we can identify what has to be done. Finally, and I'll stop there very quickly, this is given an opportunity, this new pandemic, my third point here, an action is that we are having some pre-pandemic events that are being accelerated during the pandemic and will end up even more accelerated afterwards. First of all, it's the more regionalism that we see that is going on around the world. And this is something that has to be considered by the education world to properly adjust the content that is being provided. We are having some acceleration of certain professions like automation, biotechnology, that were already taking up some speed even prior to pandemic. But we see that these are the specializations that will be very much in need once we are over this period. And also, there is going to be a very serious consideration of moving universities, the way that we know a formal education, into more of a hybrid. And no, I wouldn't say that it's going to be exclusively online, but what I see is that it's going to be very much hybrid with online, offline, face-to-face, in collaboration with research institutions and employers even more intensively than we've had before. And probably I'll stop here as an opening things. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very, very much. What a fascinating set of challenges that you've identified as the effects of the coronavirus in student learning and the impact on teachers. I'm wondering if that one of the big problem areas, as you said, lack of exercise for kids will be clearly a problem or a challenge for parents in the confinement that we find ourselves in. What about the socializing of children, Aravik? I mean, I think suddenly it's the student and the computer, and that becomes a relationship as opposed to having 20, 30 or more children in a classroom and learning to adjust to other people. With that in mind, I wonder if Anuj can give an opening statement as an adult educator. What kind of impacts will this coronavirus have on group learning, which is so much part of your adult education?
Thank you. Fascinating what everyone outlined some issues for us. Let me just, I'm most likely going to pose more questions than have answers, and be reflective, especially in the current times. I think just trying to continue the conversation where everyone left it. I think everybody's trying to make best efforts to continue their lives as normal as possible online. And I think the technology is allowing some of it to happen. But I wonder, given my own personal experience, and a number of colleagues who are now trying to do this online interaction and education, my own wife, Jyotsna, who is continuing to teach English as a second language to some of the refugees in our town online. One of the questions I think we still are grappling with is, I think in 80s and 90s and 2000, we used to talk about, work-life balance, and that was very important. And that was considered as a principal, division. And that we no longer are talking about it. We have kind of reduced that boundary. So you have, we don't know the person who is sitting at home, what kind of state of mind he or she is, who are other people, as everyone was saying, he or she is taking care of in terms of children, other people at home, and what kind of realities, fears he or she is dealing with. So we somehow, the reality between normalcy and emergency is going through everybody's mind as everybody is trying to appear normal on the online platform. And that's something that needs to be kind of understood a bit more, of how we, what effect it may have when people feel the pressure to behave normally online, whereas they are dealing with a complete new set of reality. The second issue that I think comes to mind is that we are, going back to some of the principles of Gandhian movement of equity and equality. I think technology is still, in the hands of a few. We have large number of people who don't have access to technology to the level that they can interact more freely and be educated online. So, for example, we have a question coming up here in Ganesh. When the schools try to open up classes online, there are a number of children who don't have access to internet or computer. And so what does that mean if the schools don't open up till September, which is what is looking like, So this inequity issue is an issue. Again, people who are aged or are not comfortable with online, does that exclude them in this process? And so there are these poverty and equity issues it's throwing up, and whether we are considering them as we jump on to the opportunities that online provides. Um, I think there is a whole issue of occupational health hazard. In offices, we had talked about, how do we make technology more where, your postures, your way of, I find that, after spending 4 hours, 5 hours online, I get much more tired than working in the offices for 8 hours, for example. The whole communication pattern is much more taxing and stressful. And so how do we, look at occupational health? But I think, those are some of the conversation I think I just wanted to add to what Arevans was saying. And I would like to then switch to the whole adult education question that you asked, Jill. I think we as educators, with my colleagues at Coady, and even now in people development and number of colleagues that I'm working with now online, I think increasingly we continue to ask this question of what is possible online and what remains a bit of a gap. And one of the things that we often talk about is that often the knowledge part, the cognitive part, is relatively easier to capture online. The affective part, the attitudinal part, um, the deep thinking and reflection, and some of the deeper experiences that you can create face to face and in a collective are often not possible to create online as much as we would like to. But I think, from a knowledge sharing point of view, cognitive engagement point of view, I think online is very good. So we have experimented within, for example, Zoom and other platforms offer you now to create small groups as opposed to large groups. So if you have a group of 20 people or 40 people or 60 people, the technology allows you to work in small groups and then come back have discussions in 10 minutes, and then come back to the large group. Sorry, you want to say something? Come in, Jill. I'm sorry, I think you're on mute.
We missed the last 1 minute. Could you repeat what you said in the last 1 minute, please?
Sure. So I think what I was trying to say is that I think the technology like Zoom and others are now allowing us to, if you have a large group of 20, 40 or 100 people, you can create small groups in the technology, let people in the small group do some tasks, do some discussion, so that there are more intimate interactions, and then come back to the large group and then do the debriefing. So online is trying to simulate what we will otherwise have in the physical space. And so that I think but the challenge, I think, still remains. I think there are lots of questions still remaining that, do we start considering this as new normal? But what happens is around the power dynamics between the facilitator and the participants. Who controls the conversation? Who controls the flow? Language is an issue, for example. And um, I have participated in, for example, a couple of webinars, but mostly those webinars are getting hosted in the North, global North, and not originating in global South, for example. And so partly it's because the technology is much more familiar with people, for people. So there are these power dynamics, cultural dynamics. Who speaks, whose knowledge counts. Does it take away from the participatory nature of interaction that we hold so dear in adult education principles? Those are the questions that we are grappling with. We are still, we are conscious of it. We have not really found answers. I'm doing a couple of assignments with different international actors, where we are trying to make sure that we remain true to the adult learning principles as we transit at least in the short term online processes, so that our value of who people are and where they are and what their knowledge is remains paramount, as opposed to what we think is happening. Last thing that I would like to say is I also wonder, in my own reflection, whether we are actually taking this time to relax, to be more contemplative, or jumping up and using technology to just continue to remain busy, or just soak in a variety of content and knowledge that is coming through virtual world, be it television, be it media. And maybe I think it's time for us to think about it and see this as an opportunity to reflect and to spend time with ourselves and family, and not necessarily feel that because technology is there, we need to remain busy all the time. And so these are some of the questions that I think we all are grappling with. These are not unique to me or you. And I think what I would like to pose you as a question, and also to everyone, is how do we connect this to the principles of equity, nonviolence, and the Jai Jagat's messages? I would stop there, and maybe you can come along.
Ervik, do you want to respond?
Well, I think Anuj has brought some very important items up. I want to quickly get back to those. So, and you, Jill, you also raised a very important one on what do we do with the interaction and social interaction. And I want to start with that one, that what we know from the recent research on neuroscience is that, and that is we're linking it to education and learning experience, is that we learn the majority of our learning, not if we're not considering the theoretical knowledge or conventional knowledge that we'll receive through the formal education, it's coming from the exposure and from the interactions that we're having within our surroundings. It could be at school for kids and for teachers. It could be for the employees from their coworkers. It could be from various places other than the formal educational interactions, be it online or offline. And we are missing that for sure. With this method of teaching and learning, we are very much missing that. And when I said about teaching and learning methodology that has to be adapted, I was implying to this one as well. For instance, providing, since it's predominantly the educators who are hosts in various online platforms, be it Teams, Zoom, Skype, Business, or whatsoever, they usually have the command of time, how much they provide the children to interact or the students to interact with each other. I believe it's very much important to give this informal interaction space as a learning experience in some form that the world still has to figure it out. But in some form, this interaction is important to give, just to give to give this to the learners, just to give the experience of being exposed to something different that is out there in a curricula, formal or informal. This was the first thing. The second one, on new normal thing, I think that the world is currently in the phase of crisis management. For sure, new normal is going to be different from what we used to know. That I think it's out of the table, this question, because that's for sure. But we are in a crisis management phase where we're trying to figure out how we can adapt to these new realities. And it's not connected to the pandemic only, but it is connected to reflection on a number of activities that we've been performing in the world of education, in our social interactions, in tradition and culture. So I guess that once we get, and there can be not one solution, we may come up with different solutions of what's the best way to provide professional education, what's the best way to provide childcare, which we still do not know what is the right one in an online method, if we have that, of course. And we still need to very, very carefully bear in mind that there is a percentage of world population that is deprived from this luxury sometimes of using technology. Mental health issue is an important one. And I know, for instance, the university that I'm teaching is the American University of Armenia, and the school that my daughter is attending, they have provided the services of psychologists, that the psychologist can be on the phone via online platform. I know a lot of employers are providing these services. It's very much important to consider this one, because in this crisis phase, when we're going through the adaptation, the brain, our conscious and subconscious, is not really understanding what's happening there. And this is something that we need to learn. This is also an educational experience that we should consider. And it's very overwhelming. It's overwhelming for all the possible stakeholders involved in this play. For the employers, for the parents, for the household members who are not anyhow connected to the educational world. But this is very overwhelming. And I think linking it to the philosophy that we very quickly discussed this with Anuj, is that it also would probably lead to being more open, more receptive of what the others than us might be willing to experience, to behave, and be more understanding within the household. And when I meant that this pandemic, and the actions that are caused by the pandemic are causing the change in the household dynamics, I mean that every single person in a household, even if there is one person household, they are changing their behaviors and their perception towards the others within a household or among their friends and relatives or co-workers. And when we talk about education, we also need to consider the world of education, need to consider this whole area of informal education, that there is this I would say hunger and need to educate the world in these new behavioral things and how it's going to impact our mental health a lot. And I trust that nowadays, for those who are working this telework, if there is a telework, or this incredible amount of multitasking, by no means helping to be more relaxed. And there are that's why some meditation, some physical exercises is of utmost importance. And even if someone is living alone, picking up a phone and calling a friend just to talk, to make sure that they are voicing something, is of utmost importance. But the world of education has to teach this to a general public, I trust.
Thank you very much, Aravik and Anuj. I want to say that we walked through a great, I think, 3 regions of the country over 1 month. In many of the rural areas, we saw there were no computers. So in response, in the villages, and taking into account that there is, like India, a percentage of the population in Armenia that is poor, without access to computers and technology. The equity question that you've raised, Anuj, is extremely important. I mean, what happens with the education without a computer? And what is very interesting about the Jai Jagat?
Lost you.
Did you catch, am I back now? What is interesting about being in a Gandhian framework of education on this Jai Jagat March, Aravik, is that Gandhi talks a lot about how do you educate everybody, not just rich people who can afford high quality education, where there is computers and smart schools and so on. How do you educate those people who educate everybody? And it was for that reason that he talked a lot more about experiential education. So what would be really interesting is to see in future, how do we bring some of these ideas of involving people in, say, their traditional livelihoods as a way of doing experiential education. You know, in rural Armenia, where farming and sheep herding still remains a prime livelihood, how can we see in this post-coronavirus period some of the learning of living off the land in a sustainable way as a form of education, and not simply get caught up in technology and the need to communicate, or as Anuj says, build cognitive skills only, and leaving out affective and other levels of learning. So I just wanted to bring that in. I know that we tend to talk from a formal education perspective, but given that Anuj raised this equity issue, I wanted both of your responses to it.
Everyone, would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Jill and everyone, I think we are raising some questions that I think we all are grappling with, and many of our people in our audience or group that we are here, I wish there was a way for them to come in and share their thoughts. I'll take the liberty and probably the risk to really go bold and expand the scope of this conversation a bit, if with your permission. I think, if we were to go back to some of the big thinkers of the past, and I'll quote Paulo Freire and try and connect this with Gandhi, of how I think education has to be liberating, and how it has to liberate the minds of people, and it is the basis of people's living and well-being, and also the bedrock of social movements, or freedom movement, of how do you engage with people, and education is not confined to the buildings and the schools and the colleges, but it's happening in lifelong and continuous learning. And one part of that is adult education. So some adult educators take the broader view of adult education and make that as the basis of social change and a different world. So what Jai Jagat is doing in some ways, if I may say so, is trying to reignite some of those principles in the masses, and creating that different kinds of education on that front. And I think the online world, if I may just quickly give an example and then come back to this. In West Bank and Gaza, where I have worked some with a couple of partner organizations, including Oxfam, what they are trying to do now is using technology, because there are physical barriers, and this is not new. This has been there forever. They have created innovative ways to connect over the videos and audios to have farmer to farmer communication across West Bank and Gaza, for example. And that to me is very much part of education process. And so I think technology can be an enabler, but if you create limits and technology limits certain people to get entry, then you create inequity in the system. And so the social media, the way people are galvanizing and organizing themselves in a new ways, is part of social movement, is liberating, and yet large number of people can remain outside those social movements if they don't have access to technology and those kind of forums and who speaks. So these are, I think, very, very transitioning times and transformative times, and I think what happens in the future depends on what we do now. I think it's not that it's not fait accompli. How do we make this inclusive is up to us. Applying different lenses. I hope I have not expanded the scope too much, and would love to hear your reflections on this.
Aravik, have we put you on the spot?
Well, I think Anuj one mentioned Paulo Freire. There's one book. It's called "We Make the Road by Walking" by Miles Horton and Paulo Freire. That it's a conversation between the two people on education and social change, and it's my top favorite books, because they are coming from different backgrounds. They've gone through different paths, and they are arriving at this point that in the end of the day, what we have developed since the Industrial Revolution for the system of education does not necessarily mean that it's the only way to move forward, and actually that it is missing the huge part, which is learning from our senses. And in the formal education, we're learning, and I have a lot of colleagues who have been discussing this, and in the world of education and formal education, we are talking only about learning predominantly from with our eyes and with our ears, and oftentimes forgetting the other three senses. And that is exactly what inclusiveness is not about. And I trust that in this crisis phase, we need to face that we are going to come up with, where we are going to face this inequity issues. And without having a preparation how to deal with these inequity situations, it's just impossible to make sure that we will have equity education for everyone. And what we need to consider is how we can deal with this situation. And it's not accidental that I mentioned about learning poverty. In Armenia, we do have learning poverty, and it's pretty high. And this was documented by the UNESCO statistics and also by the Human Capital Development Index that World Bank has come up with, and it's about the quality years of learning. And if we do the analysis, it's not, in Armenia we have 12 years of school education, but the quality years of learning, it's close to 8.5, which means that we, even without the crisis, we've not been performing good enough in terms of providing this equity to education. A measure to solve this issue is to really be able to have early tracking and early response and quick response mechanisms to understand probably that a summer school for those who have identified their needs would be an option. Do you still continue listening to me?
Sure.
Okay, because I had some internet problems. So a summer school, for instance, we organized last summer for those who were underperforming in math and native language. We organized this for them, and we know that, for instance, mathematics and native language are the key knowledge, skills, competences for developing as a foundation and the cornerstone for developing further in terms of grasping other different disciplines. So this could be an option of how we can address the equity issue later on. I am not very optimistic that within this crisis area, the governments or the education community can so quickly mobilize to provide any additional support to this. And this, for instance, the adult education world can probably come up with solutions in a quicker and in a more effective manner rather than the world in the formal education, because in the formal education it's very, very difficult for the people here to see beyond what we already know, and it's a problem. And I think that now is a very good time to give more space for the experts of adult education to get in and to take the floor in terms of teaching the formal education world how this should be done.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Anuj, before you respond, I'm just going to ask David if he has anything to say, because he's been very quiet. David, are you wishing to comment at this stage?
Yes. We had problems with our Facebook online. That's why I was a little bit busy. I was speaking with Abek, but now it's okay. So it was very important to speak, I think, about the methodology, about the curriculum, and about also the lack of these new technologies that some students don't have, and also some lack of capacities which we have among the lecturers. Now, it's really an important issue in Armenia. And I also want to ask our speakers, like what, as Arvik has said in the introduction, we must consider this not as a challenge, but also an opportunity as well. So what we need to do, how we can use this time, what kind of researches do we need to do to understand what we like? Do we need some kind of assessment of the period that we have? Because like we have only one experience-based opinions about either students are satisfied with this education, either lecturers are satisfied with this. We know that our universities are they basically depend on the tuition fees, so they can have financial problems if the education process will be stopped. That's why they ask the students to pay these tuition fees, and in its turn it brings other problems. So as a member of Restart Student Civic Initiative, we are very concerned about these issues, and now we are thinking about ways to understand what we have now, so to assess it objectively, so to reform the system accordingly, because maybe we will not have a coronavirus, but this distance learning practice can be used. And in case of Armenian educational system, which mostly use, like, we can't say all, but the new methodologies are not used very well. So maybe we can understand how we can use this situation as an opportunity. And for this part, the points which Arvik mentioned, these are points to focus on, like the curriculum, and the methodology of students, how they lack. So maybe maybe we can go more deep into this, and though we don't have a lot of time, but like to understand what we can do for now, like very in points, like.
Anuj, some more thoughts on both Aravik and David's response?
I think I think I'm wondering if we have. I think these are my immediate thoughts are these are very transitory times, and in anywhere between 9 to 18 months time, we will have some sanity, some more sanity back. Of I think, but this period of 9 to 18 months, or whatever that may take, is giving us an opportunity to rethink about what education means, and what all education means. I think you know um, you know learning collectively, learning together, learning at the community level, learning within the formal walls of schools and colleges and universities. They are all important aspects of education, I believe. I don't think online enabler would completely replace the advantage and the benefits of people coming together and learning together and experiencing things together. There's a lot of degree of trust you build when you are together, which is much harder to do online. There are lots of uniqueness of learning together as physically together, which I don't think technology can really replace, both in formal and informal settings. And yet, I think this transition time is probably good time for us to explore new ways to learn. Also ask this question of whose knowledge counts. Often, I think we continue to give too much, importance to formal, books and knowledge creation, and people who are in some ways, we don't give enough, importance to people's knowledge, which is something that adult educators always talk about. And this transition time, it's great time for us to actually explore some of that issues deeper. How do we actually create more equity and equality and in the knowledge creation system itself? And again, I think I'm posing questions that have been there with us for a number of years, and I'm just wanting to take this opportunity, which is kind of completely thrown our frames out of whack, and given us an opportunity to rethink everything, including education. So, I'm looking forward to articulating this much more and experiencing this much more in coming times. One of the conferences, one of the work that we are doing is with young women leaders in South Asia and East Africa. And we are asking this question we have been challenged as a facilitator to ask this question: what does feminist education means? Is there a way in which feminists would articulate education as opposed to patriarchal education, where so these are questions. I think I'm loving the opportunity to understand it, dig deeper, and articulate. So that's where I would end. And this 1 hour conversation, just the preparation of this and building on each other's ideas, has been wonderful for me personally. So I hope people have enjoyed, and you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have.
Thank you so much, Anuj Bhai. I just want to, as we round up and conclude this session, I want to reflect with you that we had the chance of staying and being in 17 schools in Armenia. We slept and lived in schools as we were marching through the country. We met many teachers, and we saw something very anecdotal, of course, but something about the education in Armenia. And what we saw that was so interesting is we could see a remnants of a Russian education. We could see the new Armenia being expressed with the Armenian freedom struggle in the education. We could see the efforts that were being made to remember the lost heroes in Armenia. We could see a lot of pictures on the walls. We met many people who said that peace was a primary factor in education. We met some brilliant principals and teachers and students, and they gave many presentations. What struck me above all was that the schools reflected the deep community of Armenia. Armenia still being highly family-centered, community-centered, and yet at the same time, a large out-migration of youth to cities, leaving the villages behind. So I just wanted to say that I think there is such a great asset in what I saw in Armenian education, which should not be lost in this changing period where we depend more on technology. Because as Marshall McLuhan said, often in technology, the medium is the message. And we lose the diversity and uniqueness of our culture, our way of learning that we have. And I found that the Indians who were on this march going through these Armenian schools, they were amazed by what they saw with the creative arts of the children in so many Armenian schools. And I just wonder how we can be proactive in bringing not only lifelong learning, art-based learning into these technologies. So we become the controllers, not the technology being the controllers. And I really value this experience of being in schools and the traditions of Armenia. And I also, to conclude, saw the gradual democratization going on in Armenia as a result of the changes, also the recent revolution. And it's very, very inspiring. So I hope in this age of coronavirus, and as we move into a new era of greater dependence on technology, we keep many of these factors in mind because they're very profound and very important in guiding the future of children. Final response?
Erwan, you want to go ahead?
Well, maybe just very quickly, first of all, I am very much grateful for this opportunity to have, like Anush said, I totally enjoyed preparation and this a lot of food that we had for thought, and on schools and on changing curricula. I think one thing, and there was a question on this, one thing that we need to consider is, do we want to stick to the learning outcomes that we have developed prior to this time? I think that we need to review those learning outcomes that we have for formal education, even for school. I was leading the process for the curricular review in Armenia. And one of the key things was, and it's still there, is to put emphasis on community development and put emphasis on transforming schools into community centers, so that all of that peculiar learning that is unique to that very small village remains then, and it enriches the society, the learning experience. So And I think that what we need to add to that is that we want these learning outcomes to reflect a person that is self-sufficient and self-sufficient enough to be mentally healthy in whatever has to come. It could be the next pandemic. It could be the economic recession that we're already facing. It could be something worse, but self-sufficientness, I trust, is one thing that we very much neglected in our learning outcomes previously.
I think we have
on education. Very quickly on education world and the world of technology. In London, every year, there is this bet for education technology, which is the huge exposition of various technological companies that come up whatever brilliant things they've developed. But we see that these novelties, these innovations are not being requested from the world of education. It's the tech world that is deciding what the world of education might probably need. Now, the educators, no matter in which setting they are, formal, non-formal, adults, can be in charge of understanding what is it that they need and make a demand for the world of technology to say, this is what we need. And this is the best time to decide how technology can support education. And like you said, Jill, I absolutely love it, not to be dictated by the world of technology. And on what David raised on in regards to the universities funding tuition fees, this is a very complicated issue. The university, it has to do with this tremendous recession that we're facing, and if to cut in tuition fees would mean cut in the payment of the salaries. The cut in the payment of salaries will definitely result on economy. So I am happy to say that I'm luckily not in a position to make these discussions, but this is something that we should consider. It's a huge challenge, and if there is something that could be researched and data could be collected to come up with some recommendations, I think this to understand the cycle and to give some solutions on where is it that there could be some cuts, additions, to make sure that the world of education is not adding extra difficulties for the recession. This could be something valuable, I believe. And final note to end, I love what Anush said on feminist education, because I think that feminist methodology has already paved its way into the world, because we've started to talk about human rights, about inclusive education, about girls in technology, and it's been very professional in terms of penetration of the world, the masculine world, where a lot of these topics were not even on political agenda of any internationals 20 years ago, not to say political government, national governments. And now we see that a number of countries are considering these items, including Armenia. Of course, we may disagree with the methodologies and with the policies, but this feminist methodology has already found its way in the design of public policies. And I think that having educated professionals on board supporting this would probably make the causes for the next crisis less. So I want to thank you very much for the opportunity that was given to me, and I totally enjoyed. I hope that the participants and attendees did too. Thank you.
Jill, would you like? Do we have time?
Go ahead.
So maybe I think quickly. I think wonderful. I think for my own sake, I think Yerevan is very, very specific, and I tend to abstract. So true to the flow of the hour, I would abstract again. I think Jill, you opened up the scope, to a large extent, and I would even dare say, I think we have been hearing about a different, a learning outcome forever. Even when I was a child and we were going to school, we talked about, education, as educated person and not for economics purpose. But I think what we have seen and continue to see is that the whole idea of competition and the whole idea of learning something as a transaction as opposed to a be, how you are, who you are, is still very much a struggle in the education system, both formal and informal, and number of societies, especially, I hate to say, the developed economies are experimenting with this much more. In developing economies, the pressure of economics is still very high. And so I think, how technology may or may not allow that democratization of and see education as being and not as transaction is still very much an issue for all of us as society. Last point, I think I would like to just quickly, say, which has come up in a number of conversations that I have been part of, is the role of the state, especially in the technology, where we somehow, or the corporations, where we believe that we are democratizing, but often we find that the technology owners and the state seem to have greater control over of how the technology gets used, and there are privacy issues that are still, we have not sorted out everywhere. So in this current times, while we are jumping on the technology, we really don't know how the security issues and privacy issues are being managed at this point in time. And so I think, I'll just end at that, note. But I think it is wonderful that I'm sitting in a car, driving to Halifax because we had to come to get our groceries done. This was the only time we could come. And as soon as we crossed the boundary of Antigonish, our emergency beep on the phone went off of saying you are crossing the boundary. So somebody, big brother, is monitoring us. And yet this technology is allowing us to be in 4 different places, on many different places, and interact with each other. So, it's a new world that, we are waking up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuj. David, do you want to make a concluding statement?
I will thank our speakers for this very interesting conversation. We spoke about narrow topics, about very wide topics, and unfortunately we didn't have time to answer the questions, but mostly it was about how we think education can contribute to make people more nonviolent, how education can contribute to social justice. And also one of our attendees was asking about the inclusiveness of education, how distance learning affects inclusiveness, because people who have some problems there, for them it's very difficult to use these technologies as a tool for receiving education. And I think these are topics in which we can go more deep in, we can focus. For a start, I can say that we are going to go more deeper into this part of distance education and to understand what changes we can do, because it's directly connected with the quality of also education. And thank you for the conversation, thank you for the discussion. Tomorrow we are going to have the next one, so if you have time, you can join.
It's great. Tomorrow's discussion for all of you viewers as well as our panelists is going to be on women leading non-violently. And we have 2 very interesting speakers who will be speaking tomorrow, 2 women. And so we hope they will take forward some of the ideas that have been expressed in these first 4 talk shows and take them forward even more. So thank you very, very much, Aravek. It's incredible to meet you. I don't think this is the last, because you're such a, you have really contributed so deeply to this discussion. Anujbai for being in the car to get his groceries in Halifax and still sustaining such a rich and important discussion and raising some of the very difficult, ticklish issues of equity and so on. And David, of course, for Restart being one of the primary supporters of these online series. Thank you to David. And to all the viewers, thank you for sharing this time with us, and let us continue to think how to improve education and in a way that is inclusive, that is fair, and that is nonviolent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us.